what J.D. Vance may do tonight. And then finally, we're going to talk about the status of the No-Go Joe movement, whether that is dead or very much alive. The president is in Las Vegas again. He's doing a radio interview with Univision. I'm not really sure what that is, radio interview. Maybe Tim does with Univision. Then he's doing an event in Las Vegas to the Unidos U.S. annual conference. And then he goes to Rehoboth Beach, which is where everyone who's trying to win a presidential campaign spends their Wednesday nights and Thursdays. Kamala Harris has an event in Michigan today, vice president. Donald Trump is here in Milwaukee, where I am. Tonight's big thing is the Vance speech, and we'll talk about that. But the rest of the speakers haven't been announced, which is a little unusual at this point. There's no zero speakers. Fox is reporting that a Democrat who's very pro-Israel is going to speak. I think Rick Grinnell, who may end up being Secretary of State, speaking. And as I put in the newsletter, I think you'll see a bunch of national security figures speak, but that's a little bit up in the air. So we're going to talk about all that. As always, we're going to take your questions and comments. So if you want to get in on this, please raise your electronic hand and we'll get to you. But first, guys, I want to talk about this question that I'm hearing from some pro-Biden people who say the Obama people and the Clinton people and the media have created this illusion that the race is over, that if you look at the national polls and even some of the battleground state polls, even with the debate, even with the shooting, the bottom hasn't fallen out. So, Sean, what do you think of that premise? Is it possible that Biden is in this a lot more than people think?
Absolutely. I think he should. I'm fully supportive. He should fight ahead and the call.
Is it possible it's super close or that's ridiculous?
I think that the bases on both sides are unbelievably hardened. And so there's not a ton of Biden support that's moved over equally with Trump. This is all, as we've said before, a get out the vote effort. Is he ahead? Absolutely not. And if you think that every swing state poll shows Trump ahead, either maybe within the margin of error or just outside. So could it be closer? But there's no way from a 538 standpoint that Biden is ahead.
Right. So I don't know if we have that slide, but 538 has, their daily mumbo jumbo fake analytics that says Biden is in fact ahead. But Tim, is it possible that Joe Biden is right? Is it possible that he's one Comey style October surprise intervention away from quote unquote stealing this election, even though he's being written off?
Yeah, well, it's good to be joined by good Democrat Sean Spicer on the morning meeting in supporting Biden. Look, like Democrats have had a rough few weeks. Everybody knows that, and we are still within a margin of error.
No, that's the 538 thing that they say Biden's actually ahead. So I'm not sure how much credibility that has because he's obviously not. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Sure. No, and if you go through those polls on 538, look, a lot of them are Trump +1, Trump +2, Trump +3. It's still within a margin of error. And I think there is a conversation to be had about whether or not Republicans are peaking too early, whether or not they can sustain this momentum. They're in their infomercial phase right now with the Republican convention. They'll probably get a continued bump out of that as well. I think the question for Democrats, though, is just what is our path back? What is our plot back to leading in a lot of those polls?
Well, but how about
538 has 77.
How about we sort of talked about this yesterday, and I talked about it on a two-way yesterday afternoon. What if Biden basically goes dark? He just tries to govern, gets an Israeli peace deal, does whatever he can to keep the base on board, and let Trump go out there and see if Trump makes a mistake, cut the lead by the convention, have a great Democratic convention, and then hope the polls are slightly off and he has some break at the end. That could be a good plan.
I mean, look, we could have the quietest presidential campaign in history if that is what Donald Trump was doing after the debate. If Joe Biden had to do that, and so I think there is potentially a Rose Garden strategy, right? That is not unheard of or not.
And stop doing TV interviews.
Yeah,
because they don't seem to go well.
Isn't that the 2020 interview? Go to the basement, just hang out, and hope.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, so
2020. It's 2020 redux. But if 2020, he was sitting on a lead. This time he'd have to come back.
Right. But the difference is in 2020, I think people had an image of Joe Biden, and it wasn't of, to Robert Hurst's description, an elderly man with a poor memory. This is a guy right now, because of the debate, he has to.
But he's trading the basement for the Rose Garden.
I get it. But the problem is that right now he can't get through a basic event or interview without doing something that furthers the narrative. But he stops doing risky events. He just reads from the teleprompter in the Roosevelt room. What's risky? He's walking out of a colonnade or down the colonnade. I mean, He's not risky as jumping out of a plane. This guy's doing interviews as president of the United States. He's doing basic events. That's not,
Well,
I mean, it's risky.
those are risky. Those
I
are
mean,
risky for him. But if you say all he's going to do is do like the thing yesterday with the Supreme Court, reform plan, just keep the base engaged and jazzed up, have a great convention, which is totally doable. Bring in whatever, have Obama, have Michelle Obama come in, get Taylor Swift, whatever it is. Have a great convention. Try to keep the base inspired with executive action from DC. Let the surrogates all campaign. Stop doing TV interviews. I mean,
yeah. One thing I would just say there is, look, I think rolling out paper and policy that's forward-looking is really smart. They're doing it with the Supreme Court. They did it with a 100 days plan last week. But I don't think it is completely sustainable to stop doing interviews whatsoever. I think the reason they've been very difficult for him is that all the interviews are pressing on the bruise of what happened at the debate.
Right,
and I think
right.
we will get out of that rut at some point, and
Right.
he will press forward with interviews.
One quick point. We all agreed, at least Tim and I mean, I'm not, Mark, you were asking the question, Mark, the other day, what could Biden do? He blows the Lester Holt interview. And then yesterday, he goes out and rolls out all these leftist policies. I would have argued that would have been the time to do it. Say to Lester Holt, you know what, Lester, I'm so concerned about democracy. I'm doing the stuff with the court. Boom.
Yeah.
That would have made.
And that would have been the lead. That would have been the lead.
I mean, I really do believe as a staffer, his staff continues to let him down over and over and over again, putting him in situations. And then, like I said, Tim and I both figured get him out of there on a push on Lester Holt. And then the next day he makes an announcement which would have appeased the left, got him fired up more. And yet it goes down a rabbit hole because no one listened to it. Right.
All right. Let's finish up on Biden and then talk about the convention. The no-go Joe movement. It was reported kind of in passing in a couple newspapers I saw that Chuck Schumer had a one-on-one with Biden at Rehoboth secretly over the weekend on Saturday. Pelosi is still involved. We saw the shift reporting, and now you've got this fight over the roll call, where you've got the establishment saying the roll call is going forward early and virtually for made-up reasons, and it's producing a bit of a fight, and it's allowing the Stop Joe folks to have something to rally around. So, Tim, I think the roll call is going to go forward electronically because the chairman controls it and the committee controls it. But are they making a mistake rushing this, or they just muscle brute force jam it through?
I don't think they're making a mistake. I think this is such an ancillary debate to the overall debate. And I'm hearing that letter is signed by about 20 members of Congress. I mean, if you got to like 50, 60, 70, 80, maybe it would be a game changer, but it just doesn't feel like that at this point. And I think the continued pushback from the Biden folks is there is not clear data that anyone else would do significantly better. And yeah, we have a nice bench of senators and governors that we like, but running for president, particularly jumping in at this point, is like a national proctology exam. It is the difference between, playing flag football and the Super Bowl. And there's just not a good alternative. He talks about the almighty versus the alternative in terms of Republicans. I think it's also true in terms of what we would
totally
do
agree.
now.
Totally agree. All right. I want to quickly button this up. Sean, percent chance, barring some new disclosure, percent chance Biden's the nominee?
95.
Okay. Tim?
99.
Yeah, I'm at 99.5. All right. Before we started, we were talking about in a private locker room discussion. We were talking about the fact that Romney's not here, Bush is not here, Cheney's not here, Pence is not here, Quayle's not here. And Sean, you said, I hadn't even noticed until I raised it. So what does it mean for this party that the establishment is just gone and it's not even news? Like if Obama and Clinton skipped the convention, it would be news. What does that mean for your party?
Nothing. I mean, I don't think they were there in 2016. I don't know that anyone cares. No one's looking around to Mitt Romney to figure out the direction of the party. Trump is the de facto incumbent right now. It's his party. The platform reflects that. I mean, I just don't. I think it's a nothing burger. I don't think anyone cared if they showed up or not. No disrespect to them in their standing, but their time has passed, and so I don't know that they would have played a big role anyway. And I don't. So anyway, from my standpoint, I said I didn't even know until you told me.
Yeah. Tim, how did you feel about last night's, particularly the everyday Americans, some of whom were extremely powerful? I think they're the best real people in terms of staging and speeches and every drama and emotion. Best I can remember at a convention. I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, just very quickly on that last point with Sean, I think that while that may not be news now, I think there's a permission structure, particularly created by those people not showing up, but all of the former staff of Trump who have said negative things about him. I'm curious to see if that shows up in advertising. I'm curious to see if that matters to folks. On the everyday people, I think that's part of every convention. I think it's good, it's smart. It does a couple things though. One, I think cable's more likely to cut away or most likely to not get coverage when those speeches are being given. It also depends on who the person is. You had a couple former Trump golf course employees there. You also had some, more powerful speakers. And I think they also give like a veil of protection for the message because it is so personalized. You don't have the DNC and it would be seen with the RNC. They're not sending out oppo on these folks who are speaking at the convention. So they are effective messengers in that.
So one thing that Trump people are very pleased about is the humanization, which of course, because of the shooting, is happening organically just when he comes in and he's got the bandage on. But Laura Trump and Sarah Huckabee Sanders really focused on humanizing him. And obviously, there's people on the left are going to say, F you, there's no humanizing this monster. But the reality is they're making a concerted effort. Who knows if it's working with the voters they want to reach? But Sean, it's not something that normally is part of the Trump playbook, but it seems to be had a pretty big emphasis last night. And I suspect will again tomorrow night. 9.5 on the humanization.
0.5. Look, I thought the whole night, it wasn't just one speaker. Some of the personal, what they call everyday Americans, EDAs, the mother talked about her son that was killed by fentanyl, the border crossing family, the family that lost he's talked about the sister, but the rest of the family was out there. Unbelievably impactful. Sarah's speech, Nikki's speech. I think even DeSantis, you saw, I was watching Trump's reaction a lot because of that split screen. And I will just say this. It was sort of like, you were like, wow, that was great. And then the next one came, you were like, wow. But they hit you from different angles, personal, issue-oriented, familiarity. I thought the entire night of programming was really good. And it calmed a lot of fears for a lot of people. You got the rivals and the supporters. You got Laura and Sarah, Vivek, and then you had Nikki and Ron. I just, well done on the construction of it. I will say, I think it might have served them a little bit better to push Nikki later, because I think here's the thing. I don't think a ton of people care at the end of the day. They're like, oh my God, Nikki Haley said it's okay to vote for him. I think from a media narrative, which is what a lot of people subsequently read, that would have gotten a little bit more play, because I kept hearing this stupid stuff about like the timing of her speech. And it's like, no one cares about that. But I think that it would have gotten the media to focus a little bit more on the significance of the speech if it had been later. Technical. So that's.
I'll tell you the risk of later, because I was on the floor during her speech. There were a lot of people. There were a smattering of boos, but there were a lot of people poised to boo if she said anything, anti-Trump, or could have been read that way. So I think they ran the risk, if she were later, of having that get more attention. And they're really there. This is not a convention like Clinton 16, or Trump 16, where they have to. There's no whip operation worrying about what's going on the floor. Everybody's in the same place, except on Haley. And I think they just didn't want to court that.
Also maybe the weakest speech. Honestly, I did not think her speech was very good.
I agree. I thought she and DeSantis proved why it was that they didn't beat Donald Trump. They're not close to him in terms of command, not just of the delegates, but of that kind of communication that's so key. All right, let's open it up to your questions. Again, raise your hand if you want to get in here. I'll unmute you, ask away, or make your comment, and we'll run through as many as we can. And we'll start with Greg. Greg, go ahead, unmute, and welcome.
Hello, can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for doing this. Just two quick things. The reason I think that the race is closer than the polls is I still believe Trump has a cap that he just won't go over.
100%. Absolutely. You're totally right about that. That's what Biden's counting on.
All right. And then the second thing is, would the press really allow Biden to just not really campaign? I mean, are they really going to go back that much into the tank now to let him not be? I can't imagine that they'll do that. But if they do that, I really think that will hurt him. I think many American people will just consider that just
he wouldn't do zero campaign events, but he would focus his week around governing and trying to get stuff done and contrast on issues. I don't know, Tim. What do you think? How much would he have to do to not have Greg's media penalty kick in?
I mean, I don't know that necessarily the media truly, I mean, Sean will probably disagree with this, truly ever really gave him a pass, right? Like you have had some dogged reporters who have been making this an issue for a very long time. We got so many pieces out of Alex Thompson about the shoes that Joe Biden is wearing and the steps up to Air Force One. And so I don't think they've ever really truly given him a passing. The conversation is just framed differently. But I think, to Greg, to your point, I think, yeah, it has to be a bit of a balance. I think there's a strength in leaning into the governing and doing a little bit of a Rose Garden campaign, but you can't give it up. You do have to be out there, particularly, I think, when there are pressure from Democrats electeds to say, you have to prove that to me in order to keep our support. And I think that's the balance he'll probably end up striking.
Sean?
I'm texting Tim all of the White House press briefings that Karine Jean-Pierre has given, and you tell me that she hasn't been given a pass. And then I'll send documents too. Anyway, I think that there is an element. I think they could probably get away with close to it as long as he's active and out there. The sort of the line between campaign and White House is thin. So as long as he was doing public things and visible things, he could probably get away with it.
I would recommend less for Hobeth, but that's just me. Harvey, unmute, please.
First of all, when Sean put up the 99.5 card, it reminded me of the Russian judges from the 60s and 70s and 80s. So if anybody recalls
in terms of the convention review?
No, just the idea of this of the 99.5. Yeah, of the review, of course, but
Harvey,
we remember
5.
Oh, 9.5. I'm sorry. That was even more of a way of reminding me of the Eastern Bloc country judges during the Olympics. But anyway, first of all, I think it was the media who encouraged Biden to go out and talk more after the.
Well, not just the media, Harvey. The Democrats too. All the Democrats said you got to do more.
And now we're asking him not to. So, but Mark, yesterday you talked about the mood of the country after the 2016, how depressed it was, and what might happen the next time if he wins in 24. So I can recall in 2016, at least we thought those who were depressed, myself included, we thought that the separation of powers kept us secure in our democracy and in the Constitution. But we're not so sure about that now. As a matter of fact, we're pretty sure that may not be the case, or a lot of us think that way. And I'd like to know what the three of you think about how that. I know you're not psychiatrists, how that might manifest itself in the mood of the country and people in general.
I've said for a while, I'll go first quickly. If Trump wins, I think we're going to see a mental health crisis in America, in blue America, that it will be unprecedented in our nation's history, because this time it won't be a surprise. We saw it coming. People understood who they were electing. And if he wins, I think it's going to be a crisis. Tim.
Yeah, I think the mood amongst the left will be total despondence. I think it would be a huge time for regrouping, but that would, I concur, Mark.
Sean, mental health crisis?
Oh, I think we're almost there. I mean, just in terms of, there'd be a big, in 2016, I remember just some of the fallout immediately after in terms of mental health care providers being on staff of some organizations and institutions that I had familiarity with. And so I think it's going to go to an extreme this time.
Yeah. All right. Michael Graham in New Hampshire. Michael, go ahead. Unmute. Question or comment.
Your plan is have Joe Biden go out and talk about screwing with the Supreme Court, which just scares normal people, and they're not really sure.
No. Michael, how do you know it scares people? Some people love it. The left loves it.
Oh, yeah, the left loves it. That's the Axios report this morning. He's going to go to the left. And I got to tell you, Congresswoman Susan Wild cannot wait to talk about screwing with the Supreme Court and following the AOC model towards the Supreme Court. Rent control. You know who loves rent control? Moderate Democrat Chris Pappas in one of the New England states where they cannot find any apartments because people are not investing in building enough. How in the world is forcing these members of Congress in already troubled districts? How in the world is making people running for U.S. Senate in Montana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania
if you message
talking about the left?
If you target the messaging just to the left and don't make a big deal of it in your general election broad message, You can get away with it
You
if
just
you're
said that's his
skillful.
campaign. So his campaign is, I'm only going to talk about
Tim, explain to Michael how this would go.
I would also just say that the proposals that he has previewed, right, which is a code of conduct or ethics that's enforceable and term limits, are actually really popular. I just looked very quickly because we've seen polling on this before. There's a morning consult poll in particular on an ethics code that's like 3/4 of the
and term limits. Term limits test
hugely
really
popular.
well.
Hugely popular.
I'll put it this way: when my reporter,
right, you're nuts. I mean, I'm with Mike on this. People, God bless you. That's how you guys think that we're going to handle this.
I have one data point to put in here. I guarantee you, when our reporters down in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire try to get Chrissy Houlihan and Maggie Goodlander, who's running to fill Andy Custer's seat, to take a stance on rent control and packing the court, they are going to have no comment.
I just don't agree with you. I know some people won't like them, but I think there are probably people on the right who would say they like term limits for Supreme Court justices because it's just the word term limits they love.
It's never going to get that granular. It's going to be screw with the court. It's going to be he's desperate, moving to the left.
That's what Trump.
You are going to go with him.
That's what Trump will say, but I'm not sure. Look, I don't know about that one, and frankly, they didn't really put this out, right? The way the Washington Post got onto it was he said it to pander on a conference call with the Progressive Caucus, and then it came out, and now the White House confirmed he's looking at it. It's a typical thing. It's like the immigration executive orders. Biden will wring his hand forever. And Larry Tribe, this is all Larry Tribe's doing. Kamala Harris's comms director, Brian Fallon, used to run this organization. I forget what it's called, Justice Dems or whatever.
Justice.
They pushed it forever. I mean, Biden, if he really pulls the trigger on this, I'll be stunned because he's always the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and is this constitutional, but I do think there's a way. Again, they got to keep the base. They got to keep the base on board. They have to keep the base fired up, and this fires up the base. The polling is clear, and again, as Tim said correctly, it also has centrist appeal. It just does. Just does. All right, hands up if you want to get in on this. Charles, go ahead, unmute.
So I'm the CC guy. Two things. On the Bush Romney comment you made, that was exactly why I asked you last night. Do you think the takeover is complete? It was exactly that point. And at this point, it looks like Spicer says it is. On the first point, Biden's road is to live up to his inauguration speech. Pardon Trump, his son, make a deal with the Saudis, and fire the director of the Secret Service. That's his path.
It'd be awesome if he fired the director of Secret Service, but his Homeland Security director said, heck of a job, Secret Service. So I don't think that's in the cards. And he never fires anybody.
Well, that's
secretary.
He's the secretary is the one who was impeached and should be fired for lack of performance. I mean, that's pretty universal.
All right. Tim, what about if Joe Biden started taking swaggery action? How would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think those three things, I don't know, none of those to my ear sound like things that would change anything about the current state of the campaign. I don't think that's where his priorities are going to be. I did think it was interesting, just on the Secret Service point, very quickly, that Eric Trump was on CNN last night talking to Jake Tapper, said that he knew some of the agents who were on the stage with Trump, one of the female agents, spoke highly of them. I don't think he would have called for resignation in that interview, but did not. I just think it's going to be obviously a continued part of the conversation, and I can't believe we don't have more information at this point.
It's crazy that we don't. I will tell you, here in Milwaukee, the belief amongst delegates and Republican electeds that there's something wrong here, that there's some deep state thing. And Sean raised this the other day. It's huge. It's absolutely
and
huge.
That's why we need. I mean, like, sorry, Sean, but just like very quickly, I'm going from a point where I sort of believed at the beginning that like an independent commission would be very smart here. I think to take any of the like partisan tinge or conspiratorial fringe out of this, I think
everybody agrees. Sean, quick, and then we're going to get James in, and then we're going to wrap.
I don't think there's anyone on the right that is not talking about this massive security failure and how much more there might be. Two, on the agents point, I agree. I've been around these guys a long time. To Tim's point about Eric, you develop a fondness for their desire to serve and protect you. And then last, I will tell you, I actually would say this. As a Republican, if Biden fired the director of Secret Service, I actually think it would be a huge thing for him.
I agree.
I think this is a missed opportunity. I don't think anyone on the left is cheering for, maybe according to reporting Jill Biden, but he would
I
actually
agree.
get a ton of kudos for that.
I agree. All right, James, real quick, because I don't want to run too far over. James, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Have you got me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good morning, all. Yeah, the Secret Service Director Cheadle thing. This is a story that's not going away. We're just starting to peel back the onion now. The two main messages coming out of the Secret Service in the wake of the shooting was that the shooter was outside the security perimeter.
Yeah.
And the second was we couldn't put a sniper up there ourselves on the top of that building because the slope of the building was such that there's a safety issue there.
Right.
Now, these are the things that make blood shoot out of your eyes. Number one, there's no such thing as a outside the security perimeter.
Of course.
That concept
And
doesn't exist.
James, I'd add a third thing to it, James, which is they blame the local folks as if like they can outsource the security of the protectee. I agree with you. And I'll tell you again, I still am baffled by how this guy, about whom we still know shockingly little, how did this guy know that if he showed up, there would be all of these errors that would allow him to exploit their failure to secure that roof? It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't have a theory behind it. I just know it doesn't make any sense.
Now, there are reports that somebody was supposed to be on that roof, either local or Secret Service, and just didn't show up. Now, I don't know how true this is or not. Nobody does yet. But going further on this, Cheadle was told to construct some other story to keep her job, or she was fed to these two messages. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like Dallas 1963. I'm old enough to remember when people used to fall on their sword or otherwise get fired. But for the last 10 or 15 years, nobody takes full responsibility. Somehow they all get to keep their job. They're responsible, but not accountable. At any rate, I don't believe her. I think she's lying. Nobody's that dumb as to say these two things.
Yeah. Right. James, awesome. Really good point. Sean, go ahead.
Shameless plug. Last night you asked the question, or the other day you asked the question about why the agents had left his head exposed. I asked one of the guys that was on the emergency operations team that question on my podcast last night, and referenced you and said, "Hey, Mark Halpern brought this up. How big of a deal was this?" I was really interested in the answer, which sort of they were like, you can't, at a certain point it's a give and take with the protectee. But like I said, shameless plug because I brought it up last night specifically because.
Well, but did this person think it was notable, or they just said?
No, in fact, what he said is, look, Bush had an issue with the dogs, and you start to realize that the protectee is going to want to do certain things, and you've got to figure out what the give and take.
But the dogs is different.
No way.
They lifted Dick Cheney off of the ground and carried him out. They wouldn't fly Bush back to where he wanted to go because they said, this is our plane, not yours. I mean, there's an active shooter. They don't know if there's an additional one, and it's give and take. I just don't buy it.
You can listen to it. It's on YouTube. The thing that he said to me is, hey, look, you don't know what's going in those agents' ears. If they say shoot her down situation, they're trying to move the guy. He's saying, I'm not going to move until I stay. And plus he said at some point he can get his head up, and then that's and my point is, I'm not agreeing with you or disagreeing with you. I'm just saying.
All right, you're just plugging your podcast is what you're doing.
Yes, I'm shameless.
Yeah, okay. Everyone listen to Sean's podcast. All right, we're going to end convention tonight. JD Vance, we'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll preview the Trump speech, and of course, we'll continue to track Joe Biden's efforts to demonstrate that, in fact, he's about to win the election. Same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. However, we're thinking of going to 9:00 a.m. Eastern time next week, so be ready to potentially switch that up. We'll see. That's a tease of our internal process. Thank you all. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow right here.